Greetings sailors and welcome to my first look at the French cruisers, and I'm going to start off with tiers 2, 3 and 4. I've skipped over the tier 1, but it's a tier 1, you know what to expect. And the other thing I want to point out that I've done rather differently this time is that this is literally going to be first impressions. Each and every match you will see in these videos is the very first game I played in the respective ship. And this has some advantages and disadvantages. The advantage for me is that I can just talk about how the ships feel to play a bit. And so it skips over the fact that these are all works in progress, they're not finalised in stats yet. And so therefore, if I were to go the normal approach that I take and give a lot of numbers, well, those numbers would probably not hold true for the final release ships. So I'm avoiding that problem entirely whilst still aiming to give some idea of the flavour of French ships. But therein lies a bit of a difficulty because they don't have much of a flavour, to be honest. So what I'll do is I'll start off talking about the line characteristics generally, and if there's any time to talk about the tier 2 then I will do, but the précis is that it's a low tier HE spec, and it's got the usual low tier casemate gun emplacement scheme, and it's fairly slow and it doesn't have a huge range or anything, so yeah, I don't know what you were expecting really. It's a tier 2 cruiser. So the line as a whole, there are things I can say about them that are negative, and there are a couple of things I can say that feel positive, but it's kind of hard to say what the strengths of this line are exactly. I think they've possibly gone out of their way to make something that feels like a very average line, because there are plenty of things where I can say this is average to bad, this is average to bad, this is average to good, this is average to good, this is okay. There are some things that are just bad. There's like one thing I can think of that is definitely good that applies to the higher tiers, but they don't have a lot of strengths to play to. And they definitely do have some weaknesses, so the line overall feels a bit, it's not particularly exciting, and it doesn't have a particular playstyle to play towards. But again, maybe that's what Wargaming's going for. Maybe they're going for an average line. So overall, I'm just running down my notes here. The speed of them, tier per tier, generally fairly average. Once you get past the slower low tier ships, they tend to be around 30 knots, just above 30 knots. So it's okay for a cruiser, but when you look at some of the other cruisers around it, it's hard to say that they're fast. They're not. They're fairly average in terms of speed. The maneuverability, the handling of the ships, the rudder response is generally okay, but the turning radiuses on some of them, especially at the higher tiers, where you start to get longer ships particularly, it can be not good, so they're kind of average to bad in terms of their handling overall. The AA is definitely a serious weakness on the line. Even the tier 10, where you look at the DPS numbers and you think, oh, that's not too bad. It'd be not too bad on, say, a tier 8 cruiser. In fact, it'd be fairly good on a tier 8 cruiser, but on a tier 10 cruiser, compared to the other tier 10 cruisers, it's quite weak. And it's maybe less weak tier for tier than some of the other tiers, but yeah, French AA seems to just not be good as a thing, and it's the same with the Dunkirk, the premium battleship. The AA on that is a weakness of that machine, and it's just a weakness of this line generally. And particularly when you look at the individual DPS figures, especially for the larger caliber AA guns, the dual purpose ones, you don't get a lot of DPS from some of these guns, even though they might be quite big guns comparatively speaking, like 90mm guns with really quite seriously lackluster DPS. One of the main downsides of the line, and this is something that you'll like, I immediately noticed playing the tier 2, and it's noticeable all the way through the line. The shell drag seems to be bad, so it's not the muzzle velocity, but it's the amount of speed that the shells lose going through the air. So you get some quite high shell trajectories, which is good for firing over islands, but it's not because of them having a particularly low muzzle velocity. It's because they lose speed along the way. It doesn't entirely make sense when I, say it that way in terms of then it would have a high shell arc, but I'm guessing that's just how Wargaming kind of models it in the game. So, in practice, AP was particularly weak at range because it was losing penetration quicker, because it's losing speed quicker. So I found that what I wanted to do was fire HE at range and then fire AP closer up. Now that's not necessarily always true, especially if you're firing at light cruisers at range, especially around the mid-tiers, when you've got things like British cruisers, or if you come up against an Omaha, for instance, you're going to be able to fire AP at max range, and it will probably be fine. But if you notice me struggling with finding the range on these guns particularly, it's because it's that drag. They just seem to take so long to get to where they're going, so that means it's easier for enemies to dodge them. Now in terms of accuracy, they actually feel alright, but that is rather counterbalanced by the fact they take so long to get where they're going. So that is, along with the AA, the major downside of this line is that shell drag that you really will notice. Concealment, the line as a whole is kind of, it's on the wrong side of average. It's not terrible, but with some of the later ships, especially when they get bigger and taller, yeah, the stealth potential of these is not good. So they're not like the British light cruisers or the Japanese cruisers, where you can make them really quite stealthy. Even once you get to tier 8 and you can fit the concealment module, yeah, it's still not great. So if you're expecting to be sneaky with these things, it's not a strength of them. The gun range, by contrast, is generally okay. They're not like the best in tier or anything, but you're never going to struggle for gun range. Torpedoes, likewise, are, I think they're more usable at the lower tiers, because tiers 3 and 4 you get 6km torpedoes, and then tier 5 upwards it's 9km torpedoes, and they're not super slow, but generally once you get tier 5 and upwards, you're talking about single triple mounts with the 9km torpedoes, so they're hardly going to be a main damage dealing component. I got to use them sometimes, but yeah, it's hard to say, even though the range is okay on them, that they are particularly potent, just because you don't get a lot of them. The firing angles for the launchers, however, are good, and you'll see that later on, so that's one of the positives of the French line. But it's kind of a muted positive, because, like I said, you don't really get that much use out of the torpedoes, so the fact that they've got good angles is a little irrelevant almost. The rate of fire, this is one of the things that definitely was tweaked, that we know about. We had some partial changes listed for us between before the patch and just after. So the low tiers, what they actually did is they nerfed the rate of fire. Not on this though, this is actually getting a 1 second reload buff. This caliber, by the way, on the Jurien de la Gravière, it's a bit weird. It's 165mm. Not that you'd notice, though. It doesn't seem to practically make any difference. But yeah, the rate of fire generally is at the higher tiers. It's more one of the strengths of the line. Once you get to the 8-inch gunned ships, you do actually have pretty good rate of fire, considering you've got 8-inch guns, and it's one of the better things about the higher tiers. It's probably one of the few really positive things about the higher tiers, is the fact that you can actually put out the shells fairly often. We're not talking kind of, once you get to tier 10, we're not talking Des Moines and what's the other one, the Minotaur. We're not talking quite that fast, but it's still pretty respectable. Turret turn is on the low side of average, so they generally take 30+ seconds to get your turrets around. It's not terrible, it's livable with, and if you choose to invest in expert marksman, you know, you can improve it a bit, but that is not a hugely high priority skill on a cruiser captain, and there are certainly others you'd want to take. And lastly, there's as part of the unique flavour from tier 6 upwards, they get a speed boost consumable, and it's nearly functionally not useless. Useless isn't the right word, but it has so little impact that it's not relevant. There we go, that's the right word. Now, when we were playing with them before the patch, it was 10%. It's been buffed to 15%, but honestly, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. On the cruisers, where destroyers rather, where you're whizzing around at like 35, 36 higher, you know, to begin with, then you can really start to feel it when you pop the speed boost. But in a cruiser, when you're going from 31 knots and then you pop the speed boost and it's like suddenly 33.5 knots or 34 knots or whatever it'll be after 15% is applied, it really practically doesn't make that much of a difference, especially because as a cruiser you are going to be bleeding a lot of speed when you actually turn the ship to maneuver, which you will want to do in these things because they don't have armor. These are, in terms of their armor, very light cruisers, even though some of them in terms of armament later on are heavy cruisers. So you really do have to dodge and weave, and the maneuverability kind of counts against that, and the speed boost becomes kind of negated by that. So I found the speed boost just to not be like a factor almost. I did use it when I had it, but it's generally in its own slot, so it's not like you can take something else more useful instead. There's one exception. There's one ship down the line, and I think it's either the tier 8 or the tier 9, where you can have something else in the speed boost slot, and I used something else in the speed boost slot, and I didn't feel the lack of it at all because it's just irrelevant. So yeah, it's a line that's curiously flavourless in a way, and they're not bad. I'm not going to say they're bad, but they don't really have any strengths to play to. So for a newer player, maybe this would be an okay line to recommend for cruisers, because like the Soviet cruisers, for instance, are maybe not that newbie friendly because yeah, you've got this really good guns, but they turn so badly, and they generally don't have good concealment at all. So they require a particular playstyle. Whereas with these, it's just, I don't know, there's a lot of the stuff that's it's not great, but it's not terrible, and so it's kind of livable with. You can play with it, but it doesn't present you any particular strengths to play with. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on the line generally. Let's talk a little about the specific ship now they've done that. So tier 2, the tier 2 was okay. It was kind of, fun-ish, low tier HE spammer. The tier 3 is where you start to get a bit more flavour. So as I think I mentioned, it's got centerline super firing turrets, and none of the other tier 3 ships do. You've also got torpedoes for the first time. You'll get to see the arcs on those a little bit later on, but 6 kilometres at tier 3 is alright. The rate of fire here, by the way, you'll see I've got about 9-second reload. The captain I was using though was a concealment expert, adrenaline rush, so you'll see it speed up over the course of the replay and all the replays. But what they're doing is they're changing the base reload from 9 seconds to 12, which is, I mean, okay. I can see it's not going to hurt it that much, but maybe it was just doing a little bit too well with the super testers with a 9-second reload overall. Now there is one especially unique thing about this ship for its tier. It has 139mm guns. So basically AFT, BFT and Expert Marksman will all have the full effect, and that's quite nice. And it's the only ship of the French cruisers where they will affect the main armament, because the rest of them, they jump around a little bit. Apparently it took a while for the Marine Nationale to actually standardise the shell calibers they were using. So 139mm, and you can get that Seal Clubby Captain on here, but this is not, I wasn't using that kind of captain on here. I basically just plonked my Dunkirk captain in because he had some relevant skills, not hugely relevant to the cruisers overall, but he did have Adrenaline Rush. He did have, I want to say Superintendent, but I'm not actually sure. I think my Dunkirk might have Superintendent. But anyway, because it's the only French captain I got, I thought, why not? Rather than try and train one from scratch as I was playing through the preview ships. So, struggling a bit to find the range here with these, it just threw me so much, because it's like playing a ship with a much slower muzzle velocity, but of course it isn't really the muzzle velocity, it's the drag. So the amount of lead you need to give varies at different ranges because of that, more than it would with a ship that was affected by the low muzzle velocity. So yeah, I was just having to, I don't know, waste so many shells just trying to calibrate So my shooting was definitely noticeably worse than normal. But just, despite that, I mean, apart from that, I actually found this quite a fun little ship for a tier 3 cruiser. And I think even with the slightly nerfed reload and whatever else they've done to it, because they might have made some other changes, I don't know, I think it's still going to be a fairly fun low tier ship. And I definitely had more fun with the low tier French ships overall. So we've got a Nassau, nice tasty tier 3 battleship, threatening our cap, and if I approach this correctly, I might get away with it. Now he could do me a nasty, definitely. It probably wouldn't be so much a problem at this tier being frontally citadel, but the armour is weak enough, even up to tier 10, that battleship calibers can overmatch you easily. I think it's the tier 6, the tier 5. I can't remember. One of the mid-tier ones anyway, I was playing and encountered a Congo and thought I'll angle a bit and maybe I can bounce some 14-inch shells, but no, I got frontally citadeled. And at tier 10 you can still get citadeled from, I think, almost any angle. It's very thin armour, and they all have raised citadels above the water, which... well, I say that actually, the tier 2 doesn't, but the rest of them do. So broadside is a bad idea and will get you deleted, but even frontally and from the rear, you can still get citadeled by battleships. So doing this, closing in close with somebody, is something you have to do very judiciously. Now he is basically ignoring me and firing at the Phoenix to the north, so I felt at this point that it was worth taking the risk, and I'm maybe going to take some secondary hits, but I'm full health almost, so it's fine. Now he ran himself aground, I think, trying to dodge my torps, but they're basically back already. I mean, the torpedo reload across all tiers was actually fairly fast. I don't think any of them had more than a minute 20, something like that. And when you've only got sets of you know, a single set of 3 on each side, which a lot of the later ships do, well, all of them once you get past tier 9, I think they're all, yeah, they're all single, triple mounts on each side. And in fact, the tier 6 has only got 2 twin mounts. So yeah, the torpedoes occasionally will come in useful. I think they're more a factor in the low tiers when you can do things like that, sneak up on battleships. Doing that in the higher tiers would be a lot harder, generally speaking. People wouldn't be doing that. Well, not often anyway. So yeah, the guns later on really are the strength, but also the frustration of these ships. But the tier 3, it just feels like a nice mix, really, because you've got 2 launchers per side and they reload reasonably quickly, and you've got to get up close to use them, but you more can at this tier. So if we can just finish off this, there we go, this Kuma. There's another kill, and thanks to that nice fat battleship wodge of hit points, I've actually got a fairly decent score. There was one ship, by the way, last spotted heading up north, an enemy bogatier, and I thought, you know, I could go after him, I could chase off up into that corner, but if it's not been seen in a while, he's probably AFK, so I'd rather go down south and actually go and do something interesting, and not just spend my final minutes even in the match chugging away into the corner and finding he's gone AFK or whatever. And yeah, there might still be some hit points to be gotten out of it, but that's no fun. That's boring. I want to put these things through its paces. Although having said that, I was overall playing somewhat cautiously, because I had this idea that I would record literally the first game of every ship and see how it went. So just charging in face first and dying in the first 3 minutes wouldn't make for very interesting gameplay. But there's going to be one of those later games where it kind of happens anyway, because basically I was not paying attention to the rest of my team, and then the rest of the team was awful. So it was a bad combination. So the Ishizushis hit me a couple of times with HE. Ooh, double fire, that's a bit nasty. Oh, and have you noticed the Bogatier started capping? Yeah. So, I'm a little bit damaged right now. I will have my repair party back fairly soon, but the engine being knocked out in particular is a bit annoying, and I found that with some of the later ones as well. In fact, there was a one game, I can't remember if it was the tier 7 or the tier 8, where I had the engine knocked out either 2 or 3 times in the course of a single battle, and I think it's just because the armor's so bad on these. It's not really particularly well armoured around the steering gear sections at the aft, so you know, HE shells can and will knock out your engine in a way that might not happen at the higher tiers with other cruisers. So I'm thinking, honestly, as a cruiser line, and this is just my initial impression, Last Stand is probably a good pick for French cruiser captains, because they're so fragile and they will lose modules to HE particularly, but you know, AP obviously, Citadels, it can also take out your engine. So we got the reset on this Bogatyr. Fortunately, the 3 battleships that had been chugging around the northwest corner and then down towards the cap, they all turned back to our cap, and somebody sighted this Bogatyr in time to get the reset. So my decision might have proved fatal, but fortunately, as it turned out, it wasn't. But yeah, it was a bad guess on my part. Maybe I should have just gone after that Kolberg instead. Not Kolberg. Bogatyr. There's a Kolberg in the next game. That's why I keep getting Kolberg on the brain. So that was all enough at the end for a reasonably respectable damage score for a tier 4, I thought. 1000 base XP, which is again probably not bad for tier 3 rather. Did I say tier 4 there? Yeah, tier 4's next. Yeah, so yeah, it's okay. It's actually a fairly fun little tier 3 cruiser, and the fact that it's a centerline mount cruiser with the turrets at this tier makes it reasonably different and actually somewhat fun. And on that note, in fact, I think, yeah, both tier 3 and tier 4 are both the same. They have a 4x2 arrangement, so 4 turrets, 2 guns each. And there's another one further down the line that's like that as well, the tier 7. And I kind of preferred them, even though the rest of them, which have a 3x3 mount, have one more gun to work with, and they have more forward firepower to work with. But I almost preferred the 4x2 because it's more of a balanced setup, and you've got kind of equal amounts of firepower fore and aft, and so you're not particularly penalised if you're having to back off at any point to reposition. But it also means that you're stronger on the offensive. So it's swings and roundabouts. I think that's more of a personal preference thing, but somehow I just preferred the 4x2 ships more than I preferred the 3x3s. So on to tier 4, the Duguay-Trouin, which I've probably horribly mangled, but anyway. And this, again, a unique caliber on the line. It's got 155mm guns. And this one in particular, there's a little bit of, I know a little tidbit courtesy of Yuzril, who's a fellow Warships YouTuber. Basically, it's to do with, I can't remember if it was the Washington or the London Naval Treaty, but one of the naval treaties of the 20s. And they were initially going to set the cutoff for light cruiser guns at 152mm. And the French had just built these things with 155mm guns, and we're not particularly happy about the prospect of them being counted as heavy cruisers because there's a cap on the tonnage of heavy cruisers that you could build. And they didn't particularly want to have to scrap the brand new ships or sacrifice other ships because of 3mm. And so the treaty was changed to 155 instead of 152, and that's why the Megami was built with 155mm guns, so it would count as a light cruiser. And of course, it just so happened that the Megami, by sheer coincidence, had the capability to be retrofitted with 8-inch guns. It just happened to have gun mountings or turret mountings that would be big enough to support that by some weird coincidence. But yeah, if you've ever wondered why, as I had, the Japanese, the Megami had the 155mm guns, that's why. It's all down to the French. So, yeah, once again, 4x2, centerline mount. Again, twin torp launchers, same 6-kilometer torps. Uniquely, this gets a catapult fighter at tier 4, which is quite nice because your AA, again, sucks. Your AA is not good. None of the tier 4 ships particularly have good AA, apart from arguably the Ubari, which in terms of raw DPS doesn't particularly have good AA, but it's good enough against tier 4 carriers, and crucially it gets defensive AA. This, you could almost consider its main anti-aircraft armament as being the catapult fighter, and the Dunkirk captain that I put on this has actually got the twin plane skill, so that kind of came in useful, especially in this game with a pair of carriers. So if any of the carriers come for me, yeah, it's going to be the catapult fighter that protects me. Now, I'm sort of overcommitted on this side, but they're kind of ignoring me, and I kept my distance, and I got a destroyer kill, so this wasn't exactly a disastrous overcommitment. There will be one of those in one of the later replays. But yeah, I've got enough range now, and the range on this is okay. It's actually pretty decent for a tier 4 cruiser, to just pepper these people with shots as I run away, because there's not a huge amount else on this flank. There's the carrier that's tucked in behind the island, and then there's a battleship, and in fact there's 2 battleships there, so if they can shoot at the battleships rather than me, that will be much appreciated. But there is one aiming at me at the moment, so I've got to keep my head on a swivel and just try and dodge, basically. So, just firing lots of HE downrange. Not much else to say at the moment, really. I did manage to get a fire there, but I think he extinguishes it. The HE, I should maybe note the ammo types on this. I mean, the damage per caliber is pretty much in line with what you'd think it is. The HE seems to be fairly standard. It seems to be around what the US HE is, tier per tier. So I think the 8-inch guns cruisers, for instance, get something like 15% fire chance, which is, I think, what the US cruisers get. I haven't checked comprehensively down the line, but yeah, it's not like they get especially good HE. And you might have looked at the Dunkirk and thought maybe the cruisers get really good HE, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, yeah, if I can get another fire going, that would be quite nice. This guy looks like he's about to run aground, actually. In fact, possibly my fire has managed to... Yeah, there we go, my fire did stick, so got some ticking damage on this guy. Definitely not going to try and get close enough to use torpedoes. I mean, it's a tier 5 match, so that wouldn't really be a wise idea right now. It's a bit kind of muddled looking on the minimap right now. It's definitely muddled looking. We've got just a plethora of ships meandering around and not really pushing any one flank and sort of acting defensively anywhere. Anywhere? Everywhere. This always happens with the longer videos. I don't know, I do well for the first bit, and then my brain starts to protest about having to do so many words in such a short space of time. So, my first opportunity to use the catapult fighter, which, as you can see, it's a fairly usual 6-minute duration on this thing. I think it's actually a little biplane fighter you get on this. I haven't looked up what the plane is exactly, but there'll be something interwar. I've got friendly fighters overhead as well, but the planes weren't going for me. I think they were going for the Haruna there. So I'm just doing my best to support right now. Maybe get some more fires going, pepper a bit of HE damage. If I can get some AP into this Phoenix, actually, that'd be quite nice. He is at longer range, but I mean, it's a Phoenix. It also has no armor. So, despite what I've been saying about shell drag and everything, oh, there we go, double citadel. You know, if you encounter an unarmored target, then it's definitely worth firing the AP still. But particularly with the higher tiers, with the 8-inch guns, there are times when in a US cruiser or a Japanese cruiser where you might be having the side of, let's say, a Japanese, you know, like a Fuso or something to fire at, something that doesn't have a lot of armor. And there are times when you would go for AP, but not really in the 8-inch gunned French cruisers. Anything over, like, say, 7-8 kilometers, you would just stick with HE. At least that's my initial impression. So, see if we can finish off this Phoenix, who can outrange me. I've got to be a little bit careful here. I'm not sure who's targeting me right now. It might still be one of the battleships. And it's not like I can hugely afford to take lots of hits, but the hit points on these generally seems okay. I don't know how heavy these ships were, a lot of them. I mean, they don't seem to be particularly doing badly for hit points for their tiers. But hit points in warships is generally tied to more or less the tonnage. Not exclusively, but it's usually in the rough area of what the tonnage is. That's how many hit points you have. So 42k so far, not bad. If I can get some more, that'd be quite nice, but we're about to lose this Haruna, and we're probably going to lose the Hosho as well, who hasn't moved. The ship's coming down the 1-2 line, and he's just not in a position to get away there. The Bogue, similarly, I mean, he is trying to move, but it's a Bogue. It's very slow, and he's actually not trying to move behind the islands. And oh, hello. It's a friendly Phoenix. Scraped a bit of paint off there, but it's fine. So just bringing the front turrets around, which is going to take a little while. It's 30 odd seconds on this one, if I remember correctly. If I can just keep towards the edge of my range, utilize the distance as much as possible to avoid getting hit as much as possible, I think that's the best strategy here. Although there are probably times when it would pay to be more aggressive in these things, and you know, the experience that comes with playing a ship for dozens of battles is obviously not going to be relevant, because literally the first game in each one. But I did try to treat them like other lightly armoured cruisers, and that, you know, mostly paid off in terms of surviving long enough to actually make an impact. So I spotted the Minikaze was being a bit cheeky and getting a bit close, so I've turned my attention to him. He looks like he's going to go up behind that friendly Kaiser, who's wandered off onto the 9-10 line, possibly in pursuit of a Kolberg. He might also maybe have a mind to go chasing after the enemy carrier, but it's not that helpful right now. He could certainly be doing more useful things than that. Although he is occupying the attention of the remaining carrier, which is a Langley. Actually, that might not even be the Langley's planes, I don't know. So, we skipped on ahead a little, and we're still just hanging on and defending, and this was quite a kind of attrition-y match. That's yeah, you can definitely use that word that way, definitely. Attrition-y, yes. You heard it here first. So we've got myself, the Phoenix, and what's that, Kirishima, yeah. All defending our cap against the Wyoming and the Koenig. And the fact that it's 3 versus 2 is actually, it's okay. Wherever that Kolberg's gone, he's not come over here to help these guys. But if we had the Kaiser here as well, this would be so much more comfortable. The good news, though, with them having a carrier left is that it's a Langley, and he probably doesn't have a lot of planes left at this point. So the carrier is probably not going to be a factor. So I'm getting a little bit closer, and I'm also going to use this island to my advantage, especially while he's basically not paying attention to me. I don't want to get too close, because then he's going to go, uh-oh, this guy's going to try and torpedo me, at which point he might just blat me out of the water. But if I can put myself in a position where it's going to take him time to turn his ship, to turn his turrets, and just keep peppering him, then that can work in my favour. So the arcs are going to come in somewhat useful here. This ship didn't feel like it's got hugely high arcs, but some of the later ones, the shell trajectories are more than good enough to be firing over islands. But in this case, I did consider for a moment there, actually. I was thinking maybe if I back out and drop some torpedoes, and then no, there's no point. He's very low health. He's burning. He's got multiple things shooting at. So there we go. The Wyoming's done, and the Koenig, which is still over there on the 1-2 line, seems disinclined to really get that much closer. He was just keeping at range himself. So I decided at this point, I mean, we're ahead on points. The Koenig isn't that much of a threat on his own. Hiroshima, I think, has still got a decent amount of health. I decided I was probably just going to head north, although obviously I'm taking a moment to just see if I can get some more fires going or whatever, get a bit more damage. While I'm here, though, I mean, I'm stationary, I'm spotted, and that maybe presents a tempting opportunity for the Langley. And if he's got tall bombers, that might be a problem, but I don't think he does. He had, I think, no, actually the Langley gets, I think that only gets a balanced setup, doesn't it? I think it gets a 1-1-1 setup. I can't remember. It's been ages since I played the Langley. So yeah, he's got very few planes left, and they miss. If he had taught bombers, he doesn't now, and if he had fighters, he doesn't seem to anymore either. So that fortunately wasn't really a thing. I should have put my planes in the air though. I should have put my catapult fighter up, and I don't know why I didn't. But anyway, so with the Kaiser closing in on the Cap from the other side, who really hasn't done a lot of this match, and you will see that reflected on the scoreboard, I decided, yeah, I'm going to pop up north, see if I can't get the carrier in the dying minutes of this game. And then the Kolberg pops up, who's low health, and maybe went back to defend their own Cap, I'm not sure. But if I can get him, that would be quite nice as well. So there we go, torp tubes destroyed outright, bit unfortunate, but yeah, these ships do seem to take a lot of module damage from HE just because they're so thinly armoured. So it's going to make them particularly vulnerable to enemy ships with IFHE, because we're talking like 10-15 millimeters of armour for some of them. I think up to tier 10 you've got, I think, 25 millimeters of armour. We're talking really lightly armoured ships here, so yeah, IFHE is definitely going to do a nasty on you. But having got that Kolberg as a bonus, I mean, the Koenig just did not want to engage. This coming up here turned out to be quite a nice decision, because there is the Langley. He's got no planes left, almost, and I can just feast on him for a bit of bonus damage. So I'm about 65k now, and if I can just get lots of citadels over and over, then I should be able to easily kill this guy before the end of the match, which is rapidly approaching. So another couple of citadels. He's presenting a nice broadside for me as well. I could even have maybe tried for a torp drop, but there doesn't really seem much point. I could just easily finish him off with the guns. You can see the Kaiser's having a go as well with HE and mostly not doing anything. But yeah, I'm suspecting that's maybe a newer player anyway. Which is, you know, on the German battleships, the German battleship line is a good line for new players. They are quite forgiving. Which is, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's not like I can say the French cruisers are particularly forgiving, but they're cruisers. Cruisers generally aren't that forgiving as a class, not nearly so much compared to battleships. So, although they are average to maybe a little below average just overall, I won't say they're like super easy ships to play. It's just they don't do anything unexpected. They don't have any quirks that you have to work around. They just have, you know, a generally average set of stats alongside some poor stats that aren't going to affect the actual hands-on gameplay. And I'm thinking of the AA in particular there. It's because you don't see carriers all that often, and so in a lot of games it's just not going to be relevant, but there are times when it will be, and the lack of AA will just be painful. So, nearly 90k damage, which is probably not bad for a tier 4 game in a cruiser. I'm sure I've done better than that myself. In fact, I know for a fact I've got a Bogatyr game on the channel somewhere with like 100k damage, but that was just, I don't know, that was steel clubbing-ish over on the NA server. I say a steel clubbing, it was me grinding up through the Soviet cruiser line rather than spending free XP that I didn't have on the NA server. But yeah, overall, the low tiers, fairly fun. Things are going to get a little different at the mid tiers, not too much so. And then once you get to tier 7 plus with the heavy cruisers, it kind of changes again a little bit. But yeah, my initial impression is, meh, they're okay. They're not that exciting. They're just what they are, which is HE spammers at range, and okay with AP at closer range, and fragile, not particularly maneuverable, and poor AA, but decent rates of fire for the higher tiers, and just okay. They are okay. So, hopefully you found this first bit of preview footage useful, and if you have, you can leave any comments below, you can hit the like button, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.